Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep today into French cathedrals using this Love to Visit France newsletter.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's full of like travel tips and stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but I just love French cathedrals.
Oh, they're amazing.
They're so intricate and just, incredible feats of architecture.
Absolutely.
And this newsletter kind of talks about how there are these like magnificent structures, medieval stone crypts, soaring Gothic arches, carved rose windows, like all this stuff.
I love all those features.
Yeah, and the arches themselves are just remarkable.
Yeah, and they weren't, just a stylistic choice.
Right.
Like the pointed design of those arches let them build higher
Oh.
so they could incorporate those larger windows.
I see.
And that brought all this light into the cathedrals. And that, reflected like the whole theological belief of striving towards heaven.
Oh, wow. So they were like building their aspirations into architecture.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And speaking of reaching high, the newsletter mentions a French saying de clocher en clocher,
Oh, yes.
which means like from bell tower to bell tower.
Mm-hmm.
And it just highlights how many cathedrals there are in France.
Yeah, right. And it also speaks to their importance historically because
Wow.
they were often at the center of a community,
Right.
like not just for worship,
Yeah.
but also, social hubs,
Mhm.
centers for learning, sometimes even shelters, if there was conflict.
Wow. So let's talk about a specific cathedral,
Sure.
the Strasbourg Cathedral.
Oh, yes.
This newsletter like raves about it.
It's beautiful.
And they say it was built with pink sandstone from the Vosges Mountains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it took like 3 centuries to finish.
3 centuries.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Can you imagine?
I mean, that shows some serious dedication.
Yeah.
And craftsmanship, too.
Yeah.
And using local materials like that pink sandstone was super common.
Oh.
It kind of connects the structure to its environment.
Makes sense. And to think, over those 3 centuries, all those artisans who worked on it.
Yeah, just generation after generation.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the newsletter quotes Victor Hugo.
Oh, really?
He said the Strasbourg Cathedral is a gigantic and delicate marvel.
He's right.
I mean, that kind of captures it, right?
Yeah, I think Hugo really gets at that duality you often see in these Gothic cathedrals. Like,
Yeah.
the scale is massive and awe-inspiring.
Right.
But then they also have these super intricate details and, like, delicate artistry.
Yeah,
It's a pretty amazing balance.
it really is. And the newsletter also talks about the Amiens Cathedral,
Oh, yeah.
which apparently a lot of soldiers visited during World War I.
That's interesting. It reminds us that these cathedrals aren't just like relics from the past. I mean, they're
Mhm.
woven into history.
Yeah.
They've witnessed wars, celebrations, moments of like despair and joy.
Yeah,
They're like tangible links to everyone who came before us.
that's a really good point.
And it reminds us about, the power of human resilience and how history repeats itself.
That's powerful. So the newsletter also gives some practical tips
Oh, cool.
for anyone traveling to Paris.
Okay.
Like they recommend taking a big bus tour
Mm-hmm.
to see all the sights, the Louvre, the Moulin Rouge, and obviously the Eiffel Tower.
Makes sense. It's cool that they combine practical stuff with the history and architecture.
I agree. They're encouraging a more like well-rounded trip.
Yeah.
And speaking of engagement, there's a new section called Travel Quizzer.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
It asks, where is the famous Kylemore Abbey located?
Fun little trivia.
Yeah, it's a good way to learn something new.
I agree.
Well, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive.
This newsletter really makes you think about being more than just a tourist.
Right.
Like, it really encourages you to dig deeper,
Yeah.
to understand, the stories behind everything.
Exactly, and appreciate all the history.
Yeah, all those layers of history.
So don't just don't just hear it, listen. That brings me to a question.
Okay.
We've talked about the past, right?
Mhm.
The history of all these cathedrals.
Right.
What about the future?
Oh, that's a good question. Especially with how fast the world's changing. I
Right.
mean, these cathedrals weren't built in a vacuum.
Yeah.
They reflect, the beliefs, the values, even the technology of the time.
So they're like time capsules in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Showing us a glimpse into different eras. And that makes you wonder, what will the cathedrals of the future look like?
Whoa.
What will they say about us?
Wow, that's crazy.
Right. Like, we're part of this ongoing narrative,
Yeah.
this human history.
And the cathedrals are like a physical manifestation of that.
Precisely. And it's not just the buildings themselves,
Right.
but also like their role in society,
Mhm.
how they're used, how they adapt, to people's changing needs and beliefs.
So thinking about these French cathedrals, they've been around for centuries.
Yeah.
How do you see their role changing going forward?
Well, traditionally, they've been centers of religious life.
Yeah.
But as societies become more secular, will that change? Will they take on new roles?
Like what?
Maybe venues for cultural events,
Okay.
places to preserve history, or even just community gathering spots.
I mean, some cathedrals already host concerts and art exhibits.
Yeah, they do.
Even yoga classes.
Exactly.
So they're finding ways to stay relevant.
Yeah, stay connected to the community.
And who knows what the future holds?
Right. Maybe there'll be hubs for technology and education.
Wow.
Or spaces for different religions to come together and talk.
That's amazing. The possibilities are endless.
They are.
It's like a transformation, reimagining of what these spaces can be.
I like that. And it goes back to what we were talking about, being a more thoughtful traveler.
Right.
Someone who's engaged with the world.
If we see these cathedrals as more than just relics, but as dynamic spaces with a past and a future,
our experience becomes so much richer.
Yeah.
We see the connections between everything, the past, the present, the future.
we become part of the story.
Exactly.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah,
Well, this has been part 2 of our deep dive.
it has. We've covered a lot of ground.
From architecture to history to the future.
And I think part 3 will be even more interesting.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to share this quote from the newsletter.
Oh, okay.
John F. Kennedy once said, "Every man has 2 countries, his own and France."
I like that.
I think it kind of speaks to why people love France so much.
Yeah, definitely. Like, their cultural heritage is incredible.
And the cathedrals are a huge part of that.
Absolutely. They attract people from all over.
It's true.
Huh.
There's something about them that just, goes beyond language and borders. They create this sense of awe.
Yeah, a sense of wonder.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's that mix of art and history and spirituality.
Right.
It's what makes them so fascinating.
And it's like they give us a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
I think so.
Even if you're not religious,
Yeah.
there's something powerful about being inside a cathedral, surrounded by all that history and art.
It's pretty humble.
It makes you realize you're part of something much bigger.
Yeah, you're just one small piece of this huge story.
Well said. Well, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into French cathedrals.
Time flies.
It really does. We've learned so much.
Yeah, from the architecture to the history to even what the future might hold.
I hope we've inspired you to maybe visit some of these cathedrals.
I hope so. They're truly amazing to see in person.
I agree.
Ugh.
But even if you can't travel to France right now,
Yeah.
hopefully you have a new appreciation for these amazing structures.
And maybe you'll even explore some cathedrals closer to home.
That's a great idea. You never know what you might find.
Right. There could be hidden gems right in your backyard.
So until our next deep dive, keep exploring and keep learning.
Au revoir.